Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you don't know, I'm Jenna and I write science fiction fantasy novels, and I help you put the magic back into writing. Slow burn romance. It's my favorite. It's my bread and butter. It is my cup of morning tea. It is my everything. Most of my books are slow burn romance. I am a sucker for it. So let's have more people write it. Let me teach you how to write it because it's the best. So if you don't know, slow burn romance is the lingering, simmering romance that takes like 50 pages for them to barely touch hands or longer. The longer it takes even for the brush of the hands, the more tension there is, the more of a slow burn it is. And it's just chef's kiss, the fucking best, in my opinion. Some people hate it. We don't talk, you can leave the chat. You can leave the video if that's you. This is not the one for you. This is for us. Next, after asking what is slow burn, people ask why slow burn. Well, I'll tell you, the amount of tension buildup in slow burn is the key to a slow burn. And it might be perfect for the plot that you're writing if you're not just writing a regular romance. The main plot is romance. If you're writing something that is a part of another genre, so if it's like a fantasy with a slow burn romance on the side, this is typically where I end up seeing it the most, then the plot is already tense with dragons and sword fighting and whatever else, you know, and then you also have this slow burn romance that just the brush of the hands barely happens on page 100 and they don't kiss until like book 3. Like, the slowness of it, the build-up, that's the key to this. So that's why you would want to do this. I don't recommend it for if you're doing like a contemporary romance and it's the only plot point really is the romance, because that takes a little bit, you know, too long if it's like a multi-book kind of thing. There might not be enough content there to string it out for that long. It really just depends on what you're writing in the whole story, but you could, I imagine, pull it off. Typically though, I see slow burn in things like fantasy and sci-fi, because when you have huge plots like wars and dragons and Vikings and aliens and all this other stuff in those big genres, it sometimes just take a while for the characters to build up to that romance because there's so much else going on and it's not the main focal point. Plus the stakes are just way higher because in a contemporary romance, typically people aren't like dying left and right. People might read contemporary romances where that does happen, but I'm saying just like the cliche version of it. So typically people aren't dying like all over the place, right? People aren't at war. But then when you have the tension of a war conflict, you have the tension of the slow burn romance, you have the tension of like, will we even survive this, on top of the will they, won't they aspect. It's so good. It's so good. The difference is in sort of category of romance, I would say these things are, is like slow burn is all of that business. Then we also have things that we have to know before we jump into slow burn, which is things like love at first sight. That's where people fall in love like the moment that they see each other, the moment that they touch, whatever it is, they get to the lovey-dovey stuff pretty soon. A lot of people don't really like this. They like more of the tension, but really it's to each their own. So again, if you don't think slow burn is for you, then the exit is over there, but for everyone else, we're staying. And then there's also just the regular sort of romance where it takes a normal amount of time for the couple to get together. Typically, they meet in Act 1, the romance starts to bloom in Act 2, they have the unfortunate Act 3 breakup, which we will talk about multiple times this month in Word Love Month. And then they have the resolution of, in Act 4 of the book, everybody's back together again. It's all love all the time, and they've resolved whatever happened in Act 3. But with a regular romance, there's usually like this little, you know, curve of like, oh, they meet, they fall in love, they get married, they have babies, you know, like it's like this, okay? Well, when it's a slow burn romance, it's more like just a steady pace across a long period of time, where in the end they might just barely kiss once and that's like it. Or if you're going to go in a completely opposite direction, it's a slow burn until which time they finally completely break and then it's all completely spicy, which also happens. But my main tip for writing slow burn is what I said before, which is the tension. Building tension is your #1 player here when you are writing a slow burn romance, and it is the key. It's not just the tension itself, because you don't really want that straight off the bat. You want the build up of the tension. One way you can build up said tension is through physical touch. It literally might be they are craving, they are touch starved people, just wanting and getting giddy at the barest of touches. But you want to start simple. You don't want to start off where they're hugging, they're, you know, kissing, everything like that. You want to hold off on the big stuff until later. And yes, like a hug and a slow burn that's really slow is literally like life-changing, right? So first thing that typically ends up happening is there's like a brush of a hand, or there's like their eyes linger on each other, just really, really small physical actions, but you know the emotion behind it because they are just head over heels for each other. Or at least one of them is. Because that's a completely other romance trope, is when it's unrequited. God, an unrequited slow burn romance that ends up being nothing, that is like my fucking worst nightmare. Anyways, so it could be brush of a hand, and then later on it's like one of the people saves them from something, and then later on it's like, oh, now like we're holding arms because we're going to like a ball. Oh, look, we're dancing now. Oh, look, you almost died and I'm crying over your corpse, and oh no, you lived. And then it's like, oh my god, we hugged when we emotionally got over everything, and then oh my gosh, there's a huge battle happening, there's so much tension, there's so much going on, will they, won't they, and oh my god, there's this thing we found out that we didn't know, and then at the end it's like, oh, they fucking fixed it, and then they kissed, and then everyone's fucking drooling from the mouths. It's that slow, steady increase of physical touch when you know the emotional impact that it has on those characters. Because it's one thing just to have like spice, but when you have the emotional ties of the characters thrown in there and you mix it with the tension of the plot, it's like fucking so good. My goodness. Is this video an excuse for me to just hype up slow burn? Maybe. Next tip is them saying things without saying things. This usually happens in physical descriptions, so their eyes might linger on each other. They might do a slow pan up and down. Saying something, you have to read between the lines to fully understand what they mean. And so saying things without actually saying things is another way to ramp up the tension, because then the character doesn't know, oh, did they actually mean it like that? Or did they mean it like in the way I think they mean it, or did they mean it in a completely different way? But the reader is most likely going to know that, oh, they meant it in that romantic way, right? And that builds up the tension for the reader because they have so much anticipation. And that's the thing with the tension, is that there's tension between the characters, right? But you as the reader, you typically end up knowing that there's going to be some sort of happily ever after, or they're going to get together in a typical book, and you're rooting for them because you like them, so you want that to be the outcome, right? Unless you have an author who's particularly evil, but I digress. And so the reader knows, I don't want them to be together. There's all this tension. I can see the tension and the romance between them because of the things they're not saying, but they're saying with their eyes, and all of this tension that's happening between them and the brushes of the hands, and oh my god, and they care about each other so much, and they're so touch starved or whatever else, right? And it's them anticipating them doing things that hooks them so much. It's the anticipation of the first kiss. It's the anticipation of the first ooh moment. It's the first anticipation of everything, of them locking in that romance and then being together. And that anticipation on top of the characters not knowing how things are gonna go, on top of the tension from the plot, that's what makes slow burn romances so addictive and why so many people like them. This also gives you possibility for multi-book options. If you're writing a series and you want to really drag this shit out, then you can drag out a romance over multiple books. And some people will hate it, some people will love it. Some people want a romance roped up into one book. Some people don't even like series. But whatever you think is best for you, and however long you want to drag out the slow burn, as long as you make sure that there are emotional beats and it's a steady incline with the occasional dip, you're going to keep people enraptured and entertained. It's the problem that typically happens is that people have a steady incline in a regular romance. They get to the top of it where they're in a relationship, and then they fall off because the tension is no longer there, you lost it. And that's the key to slow burn romance. If you're going to continue the book series after they get together, is there still needs to be some aspect of tension to keep people enraptured in the romance, because the plot tension will stay, but the romance tension tends to fall off once they're in a relationship. And this just tends to be because when they get into a relationship, the book is over. And that's something to watch out with in slow burn romance when you're writing a multi-book series. If they get together earlier in the series, is how are you going to keep the tension ramped up in their relationship throughout the books? The anticipation of them being together, because now they're together, they're gonna probably get married. Like, what else tension can you throw in there? And it really just depends on your plot and your characters of how you're going to throw that tension in there to continue it past the moment that they get together at the end of whatever book, or the middle of whatever book, whenever they get together. Just make sure you don't have that plateau where everything kind of just goes. Another tip is to spice things up with a bunch of almosts and fake outs. This is like they almost kiss, but then something pulls them away. Or there's like, oh, we thought they were confessing their feelings, but they were actually talking about somebody else. Or we thought they were, maybe they weren't. And this is the way for you to put in that roller coaster of the will they, won't they, of the slow burn is, oh, they're in love with each other, they've never even kissed, but oh, she found out something that she doesn't like about the other person. Oh, they revealed a secret that's gonna sabotage everything. Oh, they're finally together, but now they realize this bad thing that's coming, or oh no, they have to sacrifice themselves, or no, they have to sacrifice them. other things like that that the plot can impact them can help you with the tension throughout. So everything I would say with slow burn is pacing and tension together, because you never want to have it as, you know, unless you're writing a regular romance where it only takes place over like one book, and then you get to the end of the book and they're together and they have a 3-act breakup, which typically is what happens and people get annoyed with it, but it's typical. But with that slow build up and then they get together and then it drops off because the book ends. That's typical for most books. And that's what people expect. But when you have a slow burn with all these twists and these turns of the will they, won't they, and it's extended over a longer period of time where we maybe get the brush of a hand in book 1 and a kiss in book 2, then you have to add in more tension and more pacing of those ups and downs than you would in a regular book where it's one book and it closes out. Same thing if you're doing one book but it's a really long book. And even if you're doing a slow burn in one book, you want to make sure it's got those twists and turns in it, because that creates the tension. And this is just regular writing advice as well for any kind of romance. It doesn't have to be slow burn, but having those twists and turns in the pacing does make it more interesting. But for slow burn, it's required. That's all my tips for this video, but do comment down below if any of these helped you or if you have your own slow burn romance tips. And what are your favorite slow burn romances? I gobble them up. I want them. Leave them down below. I need to read more. And don't forget, it's Word Love Month, so this is all about romance and how to fall in love with your writing. And I do have a video that I will link at the end all about how to fall back in love with your writing in case you're feeling a little bit stale when it comes to not your romantic plot, but your book itself or writing in general. But remember to subscribe for writing videos every Friday on how to put the magic back into writing for you. Catch you guys next time, so bye!